throughout the pandemic and continues to provide us great insight as he not only watches what happens here in Manitoba and across Canada, but also around the world. Raywat Deonandan is a University of Ottawa epidemiologist. Thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure as always.
What's new on the COVID front? It feels like from where I sit, it's harder to figure out what it's like. Is that the same for you?
Oh, 100%. It's really difficult for a number of reasons. One, everyone seems to get the disease. Two, no one's doing sufficient testing. Three, the reporting is not as complete or as rigorous as it used to be. What's new, though, is it does appear that the pandemic is waning to some extent globally, even though we're still in the thick of it in many places around the world. And we are thinking about, the post-pandemic world already. The other new thing, of course, is that North Korea has recorded its first official outbreak, and that has me quite concerned for a number of reasons. And the other new thing is tales of the hepatitis epidemic, which might be linked to previous COVID infection in children. So that's concerning.
Is this disease kind of an enigma wrapped up in a conundrum? It feels like the more we learn about it, there's just more. And again, with this acute hepatitis that's being seen in children, we don't know if there's a link, but it just feels like we can never get through all that COVID-19 can throw at us.
It's true, but that's true for any new disease that comes our way. It's just that we're all experiencing the newness of this together as a global community, and that's unprecedented. Every disease in the past we made assumptions about and have proven to be wrong. I think the rule of thumb happens to be that never make simple expectations or predictions. The world is always more complicated. We predicted that herd immunity was likely. It seems probably not likely. We predicted that this is a simple respiratory virus. It's not. It's a systemic infection of some kind. So, yeah, there's still a lot to be learned, but also we have learned a fair amount as well. We're not who we were 2 years ago. We're in much better control of the disease than we were when we first started this conversation.
So how do you think Manitoba is doing? We're not doing a ton of official testing. Does that leave you with tracking wastewater data?
It really does. There are several things you can do absent the official tracking. You can look at wastewater, which is very good. You can look at something called sentinel surveillance, which is where you look at key points in society, like hospitals, and test everyone who comes through the door and try to extrapolate from that. Then you do some clever modeling. So with those three tools at our disposal, we have a fairly good idea of what's going on, but it's not nearly as good as the thorough tracking we used to have. So that's always concerning. But your bigger question, how is Manitoba doing? Well, as well as the rest of the country, frankly. As you noted before I came on, hospitalizations are still high, and that's still a crisis. But deaths are down, and that seems to be across the country, so that's something we're celebrating.
Raywat Deonandan from the University of Ottawa is with us. Richard and Julie on 680 CJOB. What do you make of the warnings worldwide and specifically in the United States? I know the Biden administration is trying to get more funding for COVID, so one wonders whether or not there's politics involved here, but that this returns in a big way come fall.
It just might. I was one of those people who didn't think we'd have any waves after 3, and here we are at 6. So my predictive abilities are lacking here. It comes down to, is there sufficient population immunity, and will there be another variant that threatens the existing immunity? We don't know about either one of those things. The existing population immunity is measured in terms of vaccination rates and possibly infection rates. The vaccination rates are pretty good in Canada, not that great in the USA, frankly. And the infection rates, while high, may not be sufficient to garner population immunity because Omicron has a high reinfection rate. But that threat of new variants, that's real. And we can't really predict what that'll look like, which is why we have to be ready with new vaccines, intranasal ones, possibly pan-coronavirus vaccines, or an Omicron-specific formulation.
So in the end, what do you reckon we should be doing more so on this, especially in the United States?
Mm-hmm.
Big question. There are several things they can be doing. Focusing on the test to treat plan that Biden had was actually not a bad idea. They have sufficient capacity for that. So you show up at a pharmacy, you get tested for COVID on the spot, and given the antiviral if you qualify right there and then. They have that ability. We don't have that ability, and that should be expanded. Getting out more vaccination, of course, is key. So many of the deaths in the USA were preventable by vaccination when there was sufficient supply. People just didn't get vaccination. Next thing they should do is really up the schedule for the pediatric vaccine doses. and update the formulation to match the current circulating strains as we do for the flu strains. These things are possible, and they will have an impact.
Those things may take some time, but if there were vaccines offered to poorer countries, for lack of better terms, I'm talking about third world countries or countries that don't have the access to vaccine, would those populations embrace it more than, say, the U.S. if they had it available to them?
Yeah, most would. The vaccine hesitancy issue is largely a wealthy nation problem. Poorer countries, people line up around the block to get vaccinations. There are some exceptions, obviously. North Korea comes to mind as a completely unvaccinated country. I'm not sure what their ethic around public health is, but we can see how that'll look. But definitely, sub-Saharan Africa needs vaccines, and they are thirsty for them.
Finally, what's on your radar watching in the weeks ahead?
Well, I am looking at North Korea. Hopefully we get some more information there. I am looking at the hepatitis situation somewhat, and I'm always watching to see how the death curve, the infection curve, and the hospitalization curve looks, both locally and globally, because I want to know how safe the fall will be, just like everyone else.
And you're watching that hepatitis connection to COVID. What do we know? What don't we know?
We know that there seems to be a statistical link, a temporal link. So after the enormous peaks of infection in places like India, there was an enormous peak of hepatitis infection particularly amongst the pediatric population. It's biologically plausible that there is a connection, according to some people who study this, but according to others, it is not biologically likely. So this is going to be a tension between the statisticians and epidemiologists and the immunologists and virologists who may have different takes on this. And we may not get a solid answer for years.
Do we have to get you all into a boxing ring at some point?
Fully masked and distanced, of course.
Raywat Deonandan, always a pleasure. Thank you so very much for what you do.
My pleasure. Thank you.